Good morning and welcome to this special seminar on the social stock exchange, a new opportunity for India's social sector. Being organized by the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, SVYM, the social stock exchange promises to be a game changer for the development sector in India. Over the course of next few hours, we hope to address some important questions and concerns through a plenary session that will have 2 keynote addresses by SMEs from the sector. This will be followed by a panel discussion and Q&A. We shall have a short invocation to start the program. Invocation will be rendered by Ananya.
ತಾಯಿ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಪಾದ ಪದ್ಮಗಳ ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ. ತಾಯಿ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಪಾದ ಪದ್ಮಗಳ ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ. ಹಿಂದೂ ಸಾಗರದ ಬಿಂದು ಬಿಂದುಗಳೇ ಒಂದುಗೂಡಿ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಒಂದುಗೂಡಿ ಬನ್ನಿ. ತಾಯಿ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಪಾದ ಪದ್ಮಗಳ ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ. ಹಿಂದೂ ಸಾಗರದ ಬಿಂದು ಬಿಂದುಗಳೇ ಒಂದುಗೂಡಿ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಒಂದುಗೂಡಿ ಬನ್ನಿ. ಧ್ಯೇಯ ಭಾಸ್ಕರನ ದಿವ್ಯ ಕಿರಣಗಳ ನವ್ಯ ರಮ್ಯ ಲಾಸ್ಯ, ತರುಣ ರಂಗದೊಳು ಅರುಣಗೈಯುತಿಹ ನವೋದಯದ ನಾಟ್ಯ. ಬಾಹು ಬಾಹುಗಳ ಸ್ಫುರಣಗೊಳಿಸುತ್ತಲಿ ನಲಿಯುತ್ತೀಗ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಬಾಹು ಬಾಹುಗಳ ಸ್ಫುರಣಗೊಳಿಸುತ್ತಲಿ ನಲಿಯುತ್ತೀಗ ಬನ್ನಿ, ನಲಿಯುತ್ತೀಗ ಬನ್ನಿ. ತಾಯಿ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಪಾದ ಪದ್ಮಗಳ ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ. ಭರತ ಭೂಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಭರದಿ ಭೋರಿಡಲಿ ದಿವ್ಯ ಪಾಂಚಜನ್ಯ, ಯೋಗ ಯಾಗಗಳ ತ್ಯಾಗ ಭೂಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಜನಿಸಿದವರೇ ಧನ್ಯ. ಭರತ ಭೂಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಭರದಿ ಭೋರಿಡಲಿ ದಿವ್ಯ ಪಾಂಚಜನ್ಯ, ಯೋಗ ಯಾಗಗಳ ತ್ಯಾಗ ಭೂಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಜನಿಸಿದವರೇ ಧನ್ಯ. ನಾಡ ರಕ್ಷಣೆಗೆ ಬಾಳ ಕ್ಷಣ ಕ್ಷಣವ ಮುಡಿಪು ನೀಡ ಬನ್ನಿ, ನಾಡ ರಕ್ಷಣೆಗೆ ಬಾಳ ಕ್ಷಣ ಕ್ಷಣವ ಮುಡಿಪು ನೀಡ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಮುಡಿಪು ನೀಡ ಬನ್ನಿ. ತಾಯಿ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಪಾದ ಪದ್ಮಗಳ ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ. ಹಿಂದೂ ಸಾಗರದ ಬಿಂದು ಬಿಂದುಗಳೇ ಒಂದುಗೂಡಿ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಒಂದುಗೂಡಿ ಬನ್ನಿ. ತಾಯಿ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಪಾದ ಪದ್ಮಗಳ ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಪೂಜಿಸೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ. ಧನ್ಯವಾದ.
Namaskara and a very good morning to one and all. Swami Vivekananda says, test everything, try everything and then believe it. And if you find it for the good of many, give it to all. I think today SEBI has taken this step and introduced social stock exchange. So I should say the social stock exchange is now introducing or becoming a platform for NGO to raise a fund. So now India has to reach a sustainable development goal, which is Niti Aayog's priority also by 2030, but there is a huge gap in funding. So now social stock exchange has come forward to do this kind of a screening of NGOs and enrolled NGOs, or I should say social enterprises, and creating a platform for fundraising. So also it has taken a step for capacity building fund, so which is mainly for the ecosystem strengthening, which we all should say lacking, whether it with respect to documentation or with respect to reporting, measuring the impact, whatever the way. So there are so many questions for all of us. What is this social stock exchange? How to register? By any chance, only the big NGOs has chances to raise money. Small NGOs, can they register? There are so many questions. So today we have many experts who are going to clear all our doubts with respect to those things. I welcome Dr. R. Balu, Chairman of SVYM SSE Advisory Committee, member of Capacity Building Commission, kind of list, etc., etc. List goes on. Beyond that, on the top of that, I should be very proud because he is a founder of Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement and GRAM. So we welcome you, sir. I request Praveen Kumar, Deputy CEO, to hand over a bouquet and welcome Dr. Balu. We have one more eminent speaker, Hemant Gupta, who was member of working committee and technical group constituted by SEBI for setting up of a social stock exchange. He is currently working as a head of SSC at BSc. He has built and led a platform for CSR matchmaking, and it is acquired by Ministry of Corporate Affairs over a period of time. He is on his way. I think he is experiencing Bengaluru traffic now. So he'll reach maybe in another 10-15 minutes. In his absence, we'll welcome him. So we also have panelists here. One of the eminent speaker again, G. Srinivasan, who is a co-founder and director of Rural Shores Business Services Private Limited, which is social enterprise. He is also a secretary of an NGO called Impact, which is working on girl-child education. So we welcome you, sir. I request Dr. Kumar to welcome him with a bouquet. We also have our own Dr. Basuraj, who is the Executive Director of GRAM, so, and also a public policy and development professional, worked in the social sector about more than 20 years. We welcome you, Basuraj. So I request Dr. Vishwas to hand over a bouquet and welcome him. We also have one more young and eminent speaker, Dr. Ananya Samajdar. Is a Deputy Director for Research at GRAM, and she has done extensive research on various models of social stock exchange which is implemented across globe. We welcome you, Ananya. I request Dr. Rekha to welcome her with a bouquet. Sorry, I have not given prior information, so people. One Mr. Jeevan of CGM of SEBI and Sridhar, Chief Sustainability Officer of Titan, they couldn't make it because of some emergency work, so unavoidable reasons. But in their absence, Jeevan has sent his answers for all the queries sent by many participants. We welcome them on behalf. I welcome them on behalf of SVYM. So in the era of this chat GPT, Google, that is artificial intelligence. So you people reassured that people are still faith in real intelligence than artificial intelligence. So thank you so much. It is my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement. I take this opportunity to welcome all my colleagues who worked very hard to make this event very successful. Thank you so much. Let us build a resurgent India together. Thank you.
Invite panelists to join us in lighting the lamp and formally start today's deliberations.
First of all, a very good morning. Thank you all for being here. There are so many eminent speakers today who are such experts on social stock exchange. So I must confess that I am feeling a certain nervousness today, because this is, I am a researcher and I research many areas. I was fortunate to be part of the research study on the social stock exchanges under the mentorship of Balu sir. So in that project, of course, we had the chance to study the models of social stock exchanges which are implemented in different countries. So it's pertinent to look at those models to see what we can learn. There are some which have survived, there are some which have not survived. So let's see what we can learn from them. And of course, there is going to be a very intense discussion, I think, on the social stock exchange proposed for India, so that all the eminent experts here are going to have an extensive discussion on. So now we're going to be just looking at some of the features of social stock exchanges which have been tried out in other countries. So this presentation is called SSE, a Global Perspective. So the idea of the social stock exchange now, of course, it's discussed around the globe. It's emerging across the globe. It's been implemented in some countries. It's seen as a way of channelizing investments to organizations who are working on social purposes in order to create impact in the lives of people and the environment. So it is an entity which is meant to bridge the gap between social enterprises and private capital. So which was the first social stock exchange which was implemented in the world? So it was in Brazil in 2003. So since then, at least 7 countries have set up and experimented with social stock exchanges. When we look at the features of social stock exchanges, there are diversities and there are commonalities across the features of different foreign social stock exchanges. So in this particular presentation, from 6 experiments, we'll be looking at the features in different countries, the current status. We'll be looking at why have social stock exchanges in some countries not succeeded, and the learnings and the insights. So the first social stock exchange that we'll be looking at is the one which was implemented in Brazil. So just as I was mentioning to you that Brazil was the world's first social stock exchange, it was set up in 2003. And at the time when it was set up, it was recognized by the United Nations, recommended by the United Nations. So this actually functioned for 15 years. And then unfortunately, this social stock exchange did not survive. It ceased to function. So its name, as you can see, is, I won't be able to pronounce the name in that language, but it's called the BVSA. It's a Socio-Environmental Investment Exchange. It survived for 15 years. It was a modular social stock exchange. It was housed in the Brazilian stock exchange under its CSR. So there are 2 kinds of social stock exchanges which can be there. One is a freestanding and the other is modular. So modular is when it is linked to the infrastructure of a conventional or a commercial social stock exchange, and the freestanding is when it is free from the commercial or the conventional exchange. So the Brazilian one was a modular one. So who were the investees of the Brazilian social stock exchange? It was exclusively for non-profits. Who were the investors? Institutional investors and retail or individual investors also. The returns were social and environmental. It was not a financial return focused social stock exchange. Now, this was not like a true stock exchange in the sense that secondary trading of securities could not take place. And there were many interesting features in this original social stock exchange. It was meant to encourage a culture of social investment, and it was meant to encourage small investment. So after the Brazilian experiment, we had the South Africa Social Stock Exchange, which was the second one. That was set up in 2006. It was the second global social stock exchange developed by a non-profit called Greater Good South Africa. This was again this was a modular social stock exchange which was housed in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Now, who were the investees? Now, this was an interesting model because there were 2 separate platforms in the same social stock exchange. One platform for non-profits, one platform for the for-profits. So it was, the non-profit one was called SASIX, just SASIX, or South African Social Investment Exchange, and the one for for-profits was called SASIX Financial. Okay, and in order to be listed in this social stock exchange, entities had to have a primary social purpose and also financially sustainable business model. Now, who were the investors? Now, in the SEY6, just the plain SEY6, retail and institutional investors were allowed. But in the SEY6 financial, it was only institutional investors who were allowed. And in fact, this South Africa Social Stock Exchange had the disadvantage of having a less inclusive investor base. So, it was a particular entity known as CAHAM, or the Cadiz African Harvest Asset Management. That was the only entity it was kind of linked to, so there was a less inclusive investor base. So returns, social for SEY6 and financial for SEY6 financial. So what were some of the, I told you about the disadvantage of this, the particular problem that this social stock exchange had, but it had an advantage also. It actually, allowed, apart the SEY6 financial part had a less inclusive kind of an investor base, but you also had the plain SEY6, which was for non-profits. So there, it gave a sense of ownership to people. People could actually buy kind of small shares and have a sense of ownership in social projects. So it was beneficial for small investors who were contributing to social projects. So this social stock exchange also, unfortunately, did not survive. Then we have United Kingdom Social Stock Exchange, or SSX. This social stock exchange was set up in 2013. 2013 was the year when multiple countries set up social stock exchanges. We're seeing some more also in this presentation. This was supported by the London Stock Exchange. It was supported by it, but doesn't mean that the London Stock Exchange hosted it. So it is actually considered to be a freestanding social stock exchange. Who were the investees? Now, the distinct feature of the United Kingdom social stock exchanges was only for profits. So for profits, but with social or environmental purpose. So they also had to have the characteristic of either eligible to participate in a commercial stock exchange or aspiring to participate in a commercial stock exchange. Who were the investors? Both retail and institutional investors were allowed, and both social and financial returns. And there was a very rigorous process prescribed for the measurement of social impact. So what about the whole factor of secondary trading, which makes a stock exchange a true stock exchange? So it did not, this particular forum by itself did not allow secondary trading, but it allowed secondary trading on another forum, which is called the NextG. So this was the United Kingdom one. It did not sustain in its original form. Some years afterwards, the staff and the functions of this particular organization were transferred to a different entity, to a different company. Then we have the Canada Social Stock Exchange, located in Ontario, Canada. Social Venture Connexion, or SVX. It is a social stock exchange which is active currently. So it's one of, we can say it's something like a success story. It was launched in 2013, developed by an independent non-profit and supported by the parent company of the Toronto Stock Exchange. But it is not hosted in the Toronto Stock Exchange, so it is a freestanding social stock exchange, not a modular one. It's an online platform. It's registered as an independent non-profit organization. Who are the investees? It allows both for-profits and non-profits with social or environmental mission. And for for-profits, there are certain criteria. It's not like any for-profit can become a member or can participate in this social stock exchange. They have to be what is called the B Corps. That is their sustainability and social impact parameters have to be certified, and they should get a 80+ score on the B Impact assessment. This social stock exchange has a targeting of smaller social ventures for funding. Okay, so it lists small for-profits and non-profits. Investors, both retail and institutional investors. Returns, social returns definitely, but financial returns depend on the instrument which is used or the financial product which is used. This social stock exchange is not like a true stock exchange because secondary trading is not allowed. So, in this social stock exchange also has the disadvantage of having kind of a less inclusive investor base, but in spite of that it has survived. So it's actually what we call a private placement perform. So it only works with a select and a closed group of investors. And this is the only social stock exchange among the ones studied which screens investors. See, people don't screen investors usually. Paisa hai to aap aa jaiye kind of a thing, isn't it? It's investees who are screened. But this is a social stock exchange which also screens the investors. So investors have to be impact first investors, very, very committed to impact over all else with patient capital investments. They can patiently wait for returns. A variety of instruments were were used in this particular social stock exchange. Then we come to another one, which is the impact exchange, IX. Now, the country with which it is associated is very interesting and very complicated. The literature mentions it as a Singapore stock exchange. But is it a Singapore exchange or is it a Mauritius exchange? That's a good question. Because this particular social stock exchange was set up through a joint initiative of the Singapore-based company called Impact Investment Exchange, IIX, and the Stock Exchange of Mauritius. So it was set up in 2013. It is operated by the Stock Exchange of Mauritius. It is regulated also by the Financial Services Commission of Mauritius. It is a freestanding social stock exchange. It is not embedded or linked with any commercial stock exchange. Then who are the investees? A wide variety of profit and non-profit entities. There are many different types. In fact, the whole intention was to bring a wide variety of investees into the umbrella. Listing criteria, both social and financial. So to be eligible as investees, to be listed on this social stock exchange, companies have to demonstrate their social impact, the social and environmental mission. Their social impact has to be independently certified. They also have to define their theory of change, the whole process through which they would like to create change. Okay, and there are financial listing parameters also. It's not just enough to be, socially performing well, but also they should demonstrate their market-based approach. And there are minimum market capitalization criteria also. Who are the investors? Both retail and institutional from around the world. But the focus in this Singapore Mauritius Stock Exchange is more on the big ticket investors, not on the small investors. Returns are social and financial. The social and environmental ones actually are given great importance. So the International IRIS framework of impact assessment parameters is used along with the social return on investment indicators, and the financial returns will depend on the financial performance of the enterprise. So is it like a true stock exchange which allows the secondary buying and selling of securities, secondary trading? Yes, at least this is the social stock exchange which comes closest to the idea of a stock exchange. Stock exchange is supposed to allow the secondary buying and selling of securities. So once you have a security, should be able to buy and sell it. It makes for liquidity. So this particular one is the one which comes closest amongst all the social stock exchanges, at least as per the design, as per the plan. Now the thing about these social stock exchanges is that it's not very easy to get information, latest information about their functioning. So what we know is that at least it is planned that secondary trading will be enabled. In reality, how much of secondary trading they have enabled, we don't know. Okay. So in this particular social stock exchange, investors can avail tax benefits given by the Mauritius government. There are a variety of instruments, crowdsourcing, equity fund, bond, etc. And one feature is that there are authorized impact representatives who are supposed to support investees in the listing process. So Savita ma'am was talking about the need for capacity building, right? So many small organizations might want to be associated in a social stock exchange, but they don't know how do we go about listing. So you need some kind of a mentor or guide to help them. So this particular exchange has a system of authorized impact representatives. The last model which I'll talk about, and then we'll come to the lessons and the insights very quickly, is the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange, the newest one. Okay, it is active. The Singapore Malaysia one that I mentioned, Singapore Mauritius one that I mentioned is also currently active. Okay, so the Jamaica one set up in 2019. Okay, So the interesting thing about the Jamaica one is it has a two-phase approach. So phase 1 was supposed to be only for the non-profits, and phase 2 was bring in the for-profits or the social impact enterprises which are registered with the Companies Office. So it followed a two-phase approach. Okay, investors, both retail and institutional, socially enlightened investors are targeted. Returns, phase 1, because it's only for non-profits, is mainly social returns based, and phase 2 is social and financial. So what about the feature of being a true stock exchange which enables secondary trading? It is planned for phase 2, but again we don't know details of the reality, whether phase 2 has currently come into effect and secondary trading has started. We don't know about that yet. Okay, so these are some of the individual features of 6 social stock exchanges. A few of them are active, like the Singapore Mauritius one is active, the Canada one is active, the Jamaica one is active, and some of them did not survive. The UK one, surprisingly, did not survive. South Africa did not survive. Brazil did not survive. So the question which might come to people's minds is, why did some of the international social stock exchanges not work out? Okay, so there may be, it's again, there's not much information available, but whatever I know or I have read, I'll just share that with you. So the failure to create a sufficiently large and broad market for social investing. So when that inclusiveness is lacking, that is when, the whole future and sustainability of the social stock exchange comes into question. A good case is SESIX South Africa, the financial part of it, SESIX Financial in South Africa. So SESIX Financial had an exclusive relationship with an investor called CAHAM or CADIS. So that kind of restricted the range of institutional investors on the financial side. So SESIX had that financial component which had a very limited kind of investor base. So that's an important lesson, that it's good to have a diversified, inclusive market, inclusive on the investor side, inclusive on the investee side as well. There are other reasons also why they did not survive, but one important thing is to keep in mind is it takes money to run a social stock exchange. So sometimes, there are high net worth people or companies, investors who pool in money to set up a stock exchange, to operationalize a stock exchange, to conceptualize a social stock exchange. But once it starts running, how long can they support it? It has to generate the fees for operation. So, but what we have actually seen is that social stock exchanges have been unable to generate enough fees through their fee structure. So a financial reason is an important reason possibly why social stock exchanges did not survive. The financial viability of it is to be kept in mind. Now, learnings and insights. So just to sum up very quickly, what have we learned? There are few true social stock exchanges. Like I said, it's Singapore, Mauritius. Apart from that, Jamaica is planning. So secondary trading is hardly enabled. Most social stock exchanges include both non-profit and for-profit. The developing country ones are more kind of disposed towards including the non-profits and kind of enabling their participation. The developed country models like UK, Canada, they actually have more of a for-profit focus. Even if they allow non-profits, actually the emphasis they have is more on the for-profits. Now, how do we go about? Now, Dr. Balu has done a lot of work on the roadmap of social stock exchange. So, at that time, I remember, we had also discussed that maybe it's a good way to start as a private placement perform. You start, with only a limited group of investors. You don't kind of go all out because it's a new model. It's a nascent model. You don't go all out. But at the same time, the lessons from social stock exchanges in different countries have shown us that an inclusive investor base, a broader market is very, very important for the survival of a social stock exchange. So how do you reconcile these two things? Maybe the answer lies in a phase-wise model like Jamaica is adopting. That's something to think about. Now, every country's social stock exchange is shaped by its legal and regulatory environment. And the demand side of the ecosystem for the social stock exchange is very, very important. And some countries have devised the appropriate legal form of social enterprises. So, United Kingdom, for instance, has the Community Interest Company, CIC. Canada also, has. So, countries have come up with these hybrid forms of social enterprises, which kind of merge the social side and the financial side. It's not so easy for social entities to reconcile, the purpose on the one hand and profit on the other hand. So some countries have created these hybrid forms. So not that social stock exchange is only for these hybrid forms, but these hybrid forms may find it easier to participate in a social stock exchange. But social stock exchange should be for non-profits, for-profits, hybrid forms, if they exist, for everyone. Okay, so all countries are screening investees. Like I told you, only one country, Canada, screens investors. Social stock exchanges are sometimes what is called cause agnostic. So funding tends to concentrate in certain sectors like environment. Certain causes like disability, mental health have been seen to receive low amounts of funding. So should social stock exchanges be more conscious about the kind of sectoral allocation of resources? Maybe, perhaps. Okay, and different authors have argued that social stock exchange, it's something which is not going to benefit the grassroots NGOs. This has been argued. Amitabh Behar and other authors have been very, very, kind of critical of the idea. They've said that it's not for the grassroots NGOs. They won't be able to benefit. Who will benefit from social stock exchange? Those organizations which have English-speaking people, they know the language of markets. What about the small grassroots NGOs? So, of course, this particular point is to be kept in mind. So again, what ma'am had said in the beginning, Savita ma'am said that whole capacity building thing, which is also being built into the design of the Indian social stock exchange, is very, very important. Capacity building of social sector, of civil society organizations, grassroots NGOs is critical for a social stock exchange. Okay, the global ones which we have studied, they allow both retail and institutional mostly. In fact, all of them, kind of allow both the types. But retail investors often have limited opportunities. The individual investor sitting at home has limited opportunities in these different global experiments because the range of, suitable products for them is quite less. There are regulatory restrictions as well. So to make a social stock exchange more inclusive, you should have individual small donors, small investors should be brought in. Okay. Now the other thing is impact assessment. Again, that whole thing need to build capacity for measuring impact. So it's so complex to measure impact. And in fact, even around the world, we may expect that these developed countries are doing very well in measuring impact. But it's often been seen that they're using more of output measures, that we reach so many million people, rather than change indicators or outcome indicators. Okay. Now, some social stock exchanges are modular. They are hosted in a commercial or conventional stock exchange. It creates for efficiency advantages. You can use the infrastructure of, available infrastructure of a commercial stock exchange, but it's important for the social stock exchange to retain its autonomy because it cannot be governed only by financial returns the way a financial stock exchange or a commercial stock exchange is only governed by financial returns. Social stock exchange is also governed by social returns, so it has to be autonomous in its functioning. Okay. Now, and these different SSEs which we have seen around the world, they are reporting on their own performance. So not only the listed entities, their performance should be assessed, but social stock exchange itself also has to have indicators. And they have to report their performance on those indicators, like not only amount of funding given, what are the different kinds of projects, what is the volume of funding adhering to different sectors, etc. And the other thing is that social stock exchanges are often very technology driven, and we need technology to create the whole platform of online transactions. But without that personal touch, without that touch of stakeholder outreach, a social stock exchange cannot work. So I think any social stock exchange which we are operationalizing, the one we are going to be operationalizing in our country, has to be based on extensive stakeholder outreach and awareness, so that more and more people, more and more stakeholders are aware of this concept and the buy-in is there. Thank you. That's from my side.
Thank you, ma'am. I now invite Dr. R. Balasubramaniam to deliver keynote address.
Namaskara. Good morning. It's a pleasure to meet so many known faces from the sector, and I keep making this joke repeatedly, and Hemant must have got bored of it. When you are possibly the noisiest student in your class, the class teacher's way of solving it is make you the class monitor. So I have been made the chairman of the Social Stock Exchange Committee in SEBI, so I don't have to explain anything more. I think it's an extraordinary opportunity, apart from the privilege of working with some wonderful people. This whole idea of India also wanting to try out this experiment. We've been doing a lot of innovative things in our country. Possibly the obsession of some of the visible media is not looking at all the good things that happens in our country. A lot of wonderful things are happening. And perched where I am today, it's very evident and visible. It's a lot of evidence. Social Stock Exchange is one such experiment, which is possibly the most complex, the most challenging, and the most difficult thing that we have chosen, this government has chosen. So in 2019, in the budget announcement of July, the Honorable Finance Minister said India is going to have the Social Stock Exchange. I think an announcement is very easy, but once a fiscal policy has been stated in Parliament and approved, the nation has to follow through. There have been various arguments, and I'll give you my arguments also in the interest of transparency. Hemant is already smiling. I can see that. This exchange, as it was announced, as part of the policy document, the finance minister also said SEBI will be mandated to be looking at it. And for people like me, Ananya, who are all working on this, that was the first loud noise I had to create. And because I argued that SEBI doesn't have the social sensitivity to be looking at this. It's a very professional regulator. And if you get into the space with a regulatory mindset, that's a death knell of the Social Stock Exchange. That is my view, and I'm happy to be proved wrong. Not because the regulator's role has changed, but the people in the regulator are extraordinary people who actually wanted to succeed. And so that has been my learning in the last 2 years. So they set up, in their intent and their enthusiasm, they set up a committee to sort of put all this together and say, how do we make it work? The committee, again my views, I'm not saying these are the right views, you can all take it with a pinch of salt. Coming from the NGO sector, all of us have our own activist outlooks. And so many times we are blinded by our views and we see it only our way. Whether right way, wrong way, we leave history to judge us. But as NGOs, I think all my NGO friends here will agree, we passionately believe in what we believe in. We don't have the patience to find out what others believe in. And they may be right and we may be wrong, but we don't have time for all that. And we are so driven, and that's why we succeed. Working at the grassroots, you need passion. You need that energy which only the sector can derive, but it can also be blinding. And that's another lesson which I have learned, possibly a little late in life, but I've learned it. So what happened was, many of us critiqued that committee, and I critiqued it so much that I sought time with the FM and sort of let my energies download on her and told her that this is exactly why we said SEBI can't do this. And the challenge that I felt was that it was a little investor protective kind of outlook. I won't say that was a report, but I would say that outlook. Loaded with people from the other side, maybe people like Hemant who are been in both the committees will be better judge of this, but he, having run BSc Samman, he's our side now, so I wouldn't even see him on the other side. So, and there were voices like that who were trying to balance it out and create equilibrium, but I felt that it was less to do with the social sector and more to do with the exchange. Now, we must all understand that the three components, Ananya used one word of it, the three buckets, which principally when we analyze the social stock exchange, we look at it and say, where does the money come from? Who invests money? What is their incentive? Why would they even want to put money? Just making the world a better place? Well, they can write a check. I have had several donors also sitting here. It's easy for them to just trust you, write a check and say, why? I don't care about it. I've given you the money, do the good job. And we are still there in our exchange too. So we have a journey to travel. Let us not forget that what we are seeing is not It's work in progress. Let's all be very clear. And it's very easy to critique it. We need the criticisms because we can make it better. But this is not the final emergence because we need to find solutions to a very complex problem in the world. In India, the supply side, we've all signed the SDGs. And again, Ananya referred to Niti Aayog having a division on it, everybody looking at it, the nation talking about it. We have signed the UN treaty. And as a nation, we have promised the United Nations by 2030, we'll have met the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, each of us have a view on that, and my view on that is SDG itself is less comprehensive than what I would like, but still we have set a target as a nation. It's virtually impossible to get there, but that doesn't stop us from wanting to get there. Now, SDGs, if you have to even do the activities, forget reaching the outcomes, that's a longer journey. But even to deliver on the outputs, the kind of investments you need on the SDG, UNDP estimates for India, you need $1 trillion a year of investment on the social sector. Now, where do you find $1 trillion? With all the commitment of governments, the states, and budgets are exploding. And remember, when budgets grow, many state governments are not investing on development. They're either investing on infrastructure, which is important, or they're investing on freebies. And Prime Minister did try to start a conversation around it, but it's very difficult in a political economy to talk of freebies because it's immediately misrepresented. But that is not human development. So human development, we need $1 trillion a year, out of which we as a nation are able to invest in the development space. Again, I'm not talking of expenditures of budget. Only 446 billion, which means there is a woefully deficit of $554 billion a year to be put into the sector. And where do you get that kind of money? And India's HNIs are increasing. We keep reading about it. Our newspapers make headlines about our big time people making a lot of money and becoming billionaires overnight. The number of billionaire club increasing. People making billions overnight, losing billions overnight. And then we say, whenever there's, it's very funny. I always look at it. Why would anybody even talk social when every IIM, I've been a party of being chairman of assessment committees, etc. for IIMs, every time you measure your success by the highest salary your students get, the average salary that the students made that year. How many of them even talk about the highest social impact my student made? So the narrative, all of us in this room are converted. So don't go by your neighbors here. Go outside, in the outside world. We all talk about plastic usage and environment and all these nice words. But end of the day, we are all interested in the pay packet our children make or somebody else makes. And that's how we measure MBA success or IIM institution success. That's an indicator which we use to measure itself. So as long as the societal narrative is not going to shift, a success of a social stock exchange is going to be limited by that thinking. So let's keep all this in mind, the ecosystem. So the supply side of who gives the money and how do you facilitate that? How do you create spaces for that? And the challenge when we have had 2 committee meetings and we keep thinking on this and say, how do you get somebody to even get into the space when there's no incentive? And when I raise this with the higher powers that be, the answer given is start the journey, make it a little successful, then we'll support you. It's a chicken and egg story. You don't give me the wherewithal to succeed, but then I have to succeed and then you will give me the wherewithal. It's a funny reality of life. The second part of the bucket is the most important part, and the fraternity I represent, the demand side of the ecosystem. We need money. Most of us NGOs can't produce impact because we are not assured of sustained inputs to produce those impacts. If somebody could tell me, I will give you a check every year, year on year, for your experimentation, for your adventure. You saw the wonderful science video that we presented. We are revolutionizing rural science education in India, but we are limited by only a small number of people we can reach, a small number of children we can reach, 30,000 plus children that we can reach through government schools. We want to get into other states. We are already talking to other states. But the limitation is who will pay us for it? Where do you get the money? Science is an investment you make for decades for the nation to start seeing the returns. But who can even understand this? Vivekananda said, give Indians a scientific temperament, the rest will follow, he said. He said this more than 100 years ago, and we still haven't given science. But if somebody can tell me, I will underwrite your check for science education year after year for the next 10 years till you produce that impact, and I will declare the impact. HT Kote Taluk, when we started this, I think Praveen can validate my numbers. I'm not sure where the numbers are today. I think the studies he did was, there was a 25% increase many years ago. Praveen can correct me if I'm wrong, wherever you're sitting, in the number of children getting into professional science education. Now, much higher now? From 4% to 25%, with around 4-5 years of investment on science education. It is important because we live in a STEM economy and we want India to progress. We can talk of humanities till the cows come home. We need all that. But end of the day, we need an economy which is so urban-centric until you reverse the equation, an economy which is so STEM-driven. You need science education. Now, who's going to give me the money? And there is no consistency, there is no continuity, and therefore we can't produce impact. So demand side, we are all suffering from money. It's not that we are all good NGOs, but nobody tells you are a very good NGO, therefore I'll support you for 10 years. At the same time, goodness comes when we say, how can I declare my goodness? All of us will say we're very good NGOs. Show me one NGO, and even these numbers are a joke. Everybody you ask, they say 3.2 million NGOs. And I keep asking this question. I asked some of my senior, now that I can have some answers to these questions, I asked the income tax department, they say, we only know some 100,000 who submit returns. You ask Darpan, they tried to put 100,000 together. Now getting Darpan to work itself is a challenge for NGOs. You ask FCRA, they'll say 16,000. But where the hell is the authenticated database of NGOs that we can get up and say, we are so many of us? What are the sizes? What are the flavors? And we all quote these numbers. I have written articles also saying 3.2 million because that's a CBI's report to High Court. Of all the people, CBI presents a report to High Court and we accept that number. We don't even do an understanding of ourselves. So the demand side ecosystem is so grey. But the more important is the intermediary. The regulator, the intermediaries, the exchanges, the entire ecosystem. Now we need to understand all three have to succeed if the exchange has to succeed. Ananya was challenging and asking us how to make it succeed. We need to make it favorable for the investors, and only the state can actually initiate the move. And I know the amount of work several of us put in to get the ZCZP. Hemant will talk a lot about the nuts and bolts and the operationalization, how to get onto the exchange. The zero coupon, zero principal bond had to be notified as a security instrument. And that is a process, which means there's nothing there, but it's a process. And that's what it has to be notified by the Ministry of Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, and there's a whole process. And they have their own questions and their own challenges. But essentially, it's a new name for donations. Right? But is that all that is? No. It's a first step. And we can make it hatch eggs and go on. The demand side, we still have so many ways you can become an NGO in this country. You go to Maharashtra, it's a Bombay Trust Act, and they are so rigorous that everybody is afraid of the Bombay Trust Act. They don't see it as a facilitatory act. And I want to let you on another story. This is a fascinating learning for me. I never asked this question 40 years ago when I started the Vivekananda Youth Movement, because I just did what everybody did. We never said, why are we registering under the Societies Registration Act? Many of you here might be registered under the Societies Registration Act. Some of you might be Section 8 companies, some of you may be trusts. But Societies Registration Act is a product of what? It's one of the oldest acts that we have. Our country is already, again, many of you might be following this, close to 1600, 1700 legislations. We have absolutely useless, obsolete ones with no impact on society have been eliminated by Parliament in the last 3-4 years. And a lot more will happen. In the Panch Pran, we talk about, the Prime Minister talks about decolonizing our thinking, which also includes acts. I believe the Societies Registration Act is one such product. It came in 1860. And 1860, the context is it came after 1857, when the first war of Indian independence happened. And the British administration was convinced, if you get 7 Indians to come together, don't ask me how they thought of 7. And that is why you need 7 people to register an organization. Many of us don't even, I didn't know why 7. 7 is because they decided that if 7 Indians come together, they'll start a fight for Indian independence. How 7 could matter? God only knows. Why not 6? Why not one Gandhi? Maybe they didn't think about it too deeply. And we are still going into that act made on mistrust, saying that if Association of Persons of India will actually trouble us. So the whole construct is anti-establishment. You are there to trouble us. We were not seen as partners in progress to build a nation, because act is not a product of independent India. It's a product of a colonial ruler who felt that if we get together, will create troubles for them. And therefore, we should now know where you're getting together, how you are getting together, where you're getting your money from, who's giving you the money, and how you are spending it. And we are still following the same damn mentality of mistrust and reporting to the state what we do. Now, it should be changed, all of us agree, but that is the demand side we live in. So, you can register under that, you can become a Yuvak Mandal, go to the youth office and say, I'm an organization, you'll still be recognized. So there are 100 ways. So in the committee, when we are talking about it in the second group, which was set up by SEBI, because the finance ministry felt that they needed to go deeper and come out with more operational practicalities, the nuts and bolts, and therefore the technical support group, and I was happy to be a part of it. All of us discussed, and we realized that you cannot legally describe a social entity in this country. There are NGOs and there are NGOs and there are NGOs, but there's no legal definition. A lot of countries like UK, though it's a not-for-profit movement, the B Corp is not a legal entity, but legislatures have approved B Corp as a legal entity. So it was started by a non-profit. We have CICs, within Canada we have 3-4 models, in UK we have 3-4 models. The European Union is the most mature in terms of social enterprises. UK is very mature. They have laws for CICs which can actually permit their survival, and still they couldn't survive in the exchange. So we have to learn a lot of lessons, and all of us together only can do it. It's not one SEBI, one BSE, one SSE or the finance ministry can solve this problem. I think the supply, demand and the intermediaries together is what we can make this work, and India's moment has truly come. And we have to show the world that we can sustain and build a social stock exchange which is successful, and others can copy from us. Because I think that is the kind of the inspiration we have to take to do this work. It's going to be hard, long work. The current model, what we're starting is what we are here to present to you, and Hemant will talk about it. And we are not looking to you to just listen to us. At least personally, as the chairman of the committee, I would say, tell us what you think is not going to work. Tell us what you think can make it better. Tell us how do you think we can do something else or experiment. And please don't just stand outside and criticize. It's very easy. I've done it. Please join hands and say, can we make it better together? And that's the journey all of us have to embark on. And it's not going to be easy for us, because we can all ensure the demand side is in our hands. It's also by the government, because government regulates us. The supply side, the intermediaries have set, and I can tell you, now being an insider in the system of SEBI, they are very sincere and serious about making this work. They're conceding they don't know much about the social sector. They're willing to learn. They're wanting to learn from us. So let's not lose the opportunity of saying they will not do it. Tell us how it should be done, and together let's make it happen. The supply side, we have to talk to our donors. We have to talk to our partners. SVYM like organizations, which has close to 120 plus partners, should start telling some of them, it's great you're writing a check for us, but can you do it through the SSE also? So can we start repurposing our own instruments of support to show that we can walk this journey and travel this distance, and then tell others there is a model for us to imitate. Because we as a nation need to find that additional resources. There are certain disturbing signals. COVID has enhanced the high net worth potential of this country, unlike what others think. High net worth, the others are all going down. But the philanthropic intent of this high net worth has gone down the last 2 years, which is actually going up. One man shifted the way he donated and it fell. That means one man runs the philanthropic ecosystem in this country. That is not acceptable, right? He's anyway doing his philanthropy, but the way it got measured was different, so it falls. But the rest of the country is also growing, not that one man alone. And we have to get the rest of the country to participate with us. The supply side have to be more adequately sensitized. And the capacity building fund, let me make one correction. It is not, we recognize in the committee, it may not be enough money for this country, but it will grow. That it is not just for NGOs. Let's not fool ourselves to believing only NGOs need capacity. Come on. People with money also need capacity to give. People on the other side also have to be socially sensitized. They need to understand how social development happens, how social impact happens. We have to develop assessors. I don't like to use the word auditors. We have to get the capability to assess, which NISM has already started, but it has to be made better and better. The instruments have to be fine-tuned. So we have to spend money on building the entire ecosystem, the supply, the intermediary demand. SEBI needs training and knowledge. Exchanges need training and knowledge. The staff need, because they are trained in something else. They're all willing to learn. The intent is clear. And my last call is to my fraternity and brethren here. And you may criticize me, you may critique me, I am willing to take it. But having been 4 decades in this space, I am willing to risk this judgment of yours. I think we are slow to change, the slowest in the system. The state is changing so fast, but we are convinced that they will not change and we keep criticizing it. Jan Bhagidari is not a slogan of the government. It is a meant intent. Every day I am being challenged and asked, how do you make it work? How does the government of India reflect Jan Bhagidari in everything? How do you make it happen in programs? But are the citizens ready? Citizens love to get. Give me free laptops, give me free everything. How will I also work for the nation is a question we don't understand. We are not ready for partnerships. We as a sector have to learn to work not only with each other, and we are all ego-driven, and I call a spade, including me. We all are so beautifully great people that we think only I can solve the world's problems. Somebody can do it as well as me, equally better or better than me. Can I just partner with them? Can I learn from the other? Can I learn from each other? And can we learn from other sectors, the private sector, the corporates, SEBI? Like when I went into the SEBI committee also, I went in, these guys are idiots. They don't know social sector. I'm going to teach them. And I carried that gene, which is difficult to throw it off, but I'm working on it. But can we be activist enough to make it succeed? But in the spirit of partnership. That is what the country needs today to solve this complex problem. So tomorrow, if it fails, let us not simply point a finger and say, SEBI failed, BSE failed, NSE failed, Government of India failed. Let us tell ourselves that we didn't make it work because we didn't participate seriously enough. But we will not get there. We will make it work. Thank you.
Now I would like to invite Shri Hemant Gupta to share his thoughts on the social stock exchange.
Thank you. Good morning. It's still morning, right? My name is Hemant Gupta. I am a part of Bombay Stock Exchange and I do a couple of functions. I was going to come to that. So I do a couple of things there to Balu's point. One is that I, of course, run the social stock exchange and I was fortunate enough to be a part of the journey right from the beginning. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I also run the startup incubator there. It's called Zone Startups, where we work with technology incubators. And before that, again, Balu referred to this, I was also running a subsidiary of BSE called BSE Samman that was focusing on CSR consulting. And I actually came in completely new to the social development sector after more than 2 decades in the corporate sector. And I've learned a lot. I've probably learned far more in these last 6-7 years than I have in my entire working life before that. And especially in the last 2 to 3 years with the social stock exchange. What I will do is, and Ananya and Dr. Balu are a hard act to follow. So I'll try and fill in the gaps in terms of what they may have missed out, if anything. I think we have a Q&A session after and a panel discussion afterwards. So just hold on to your questions, unless it's something urgent, and we'll take them up later. Yeah? Okay, let's get started. All right, so this has been referred to in the past, so I'll quickly go over it. July 19, the interim budget after the elections, Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman introduced the concept of a social stock exchange. Very importantly, under the purview of SEBI, which basically the intent was, India has one of the most stable and capital market systems, and the idea was that can we leverage that the regulations, the framework, right? SEBI created 2 committees that followed the announcement. The first one was in September 2019. The second one was in September 2020. And essentially what the working committee, which was the first committee, worked on the architecture. So kind of what are the broad framework of the social stock exchange. And then the technical group actually drilled down into the operational details of the social stock exchange. two things I should mention is that one is that we did, to Ananya's point, try and learn as much as possible from the experiments that happened in the other countries, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We may not have addressed everything, but we tried to do what we could. And the second is, these committees did not work in isolation. So they actually consulted with social investors, they consulted with the NGOs, with professional stakeholders. Right, so, and I have in one slide summarized like 200 pages, so you'll have to excuse if I've missed out something. But broadly speaking, I pulled out the more important points. The first was that the working committee said that the social stock exchange is not a separate stock exchange. It is a part of the existing stock exchanges. So both BSE and NSE now have a segment called the social stock exchange. This is important because then you're not recreating the wheel, so to speak, right? You're inheriting a lot of the regulations, the guidelines, the disclosure requirements that go with being a stock exchange, that have lent the stability to the capital markets in this country. And then you can enhance them or modify them as required. Second, given that the social stock exchange would be something completely new to all stakeholders, as Dr. Balu said, not just not-for-profits, to the investors, to the intermediaries, to the stock exchange, to the NGOs, of course, and social enterprises, for-profit, why don't we set up a fund that can build on building awareness, building capability to leverage the social stock exchange, called the Capacity Building Fund. And the third was that can we create a bridge between the existing social development ecosystem and the social stock exchange? Can we have a way of taking a donation or a grant, which is the most common way of giving money into the social sector, and put that also on the stock exchange, and hence the fancy zero coupon, zero principal instrument. And I'll stress upon the fact that it's an instrument, not a bond, because there is no interest being earned, zero coupon, and the money is not coming back to the person who's giving the money, so zero principal. And in other words, nothing but a donation or a grant. Right, so that's broadly what the working committee did. The subsequent technical group, like I said, drilled down into more operational details, and it was actually broken up into 4 subgroups, right, that had onboarding, social audit, disclosures, reporting requirements. And essentially what the technical group said is the first litmus test, because again, going back to what Balu said, there is no definition of a social enterprise in this country, right? So the first litmus test is the test of being qualified as a social enterprise, which is the primacy of social intent. The second is that being on a stock exchange, being a recipient of investor funds, you have to make disclosures. We should add to the financial disclosures that exist, impact-related disclosures, because mostly we are looking at a social return, not a financial return. Third, and this was actually something that took a lot of debate and discussion, the concept of a social assessor or social auditor, again, bringing transparency into what's happening with the funds, not being a policeman, but somebody who's saying that if you in your prospectus, in your proposal said, I will do X, are you doing X? Right? And therefore, I, who might be sitting in any part of India, because remember what a stock exchange does, it expands the network to all corners of India, right? Can get an assessment of what is happening with my funds that I gave. And last, which actually, in my opinion, personal opinion, is the way of the future, the social venture fund was altered to make it more friendly for people to raise money. And this session, I will not talk about the social venture fund. or actually another instrument called the social development bond. But we should talk about it in a subsequent session. I'll focus on the NGO piece in this one. Okay, right. So those two committees were followed by 5 regulations so far, 5 notifications and regulations that started out with the Ministry of Finance notifying that zero coupon, zero principal is an instrument that can be traded as a security that can be traded on the stock exchange. And the last one so far was on October 13th, which created a governing council for steering the social stock exchange in every stock exchange. So BSE has a governing council, SSE has a governing council. In fact, I actually once in a while write a blog. So if you guys are on LinkedIn, I've got more details on what a governing council does in my blog. Okay, now this summarizes actually something that cannot be summarized, but it is my attempt at summarizing it. But why should a person come to the stock exchange and raise funds, and why should a person give funds, right? And how many of you have demat accounts? Can you raise hands? Okay, that's quite a few. Right, so why does a stock exchange, why do you go through a stock exchange to invest in companies rather than investing directly, right? You guys, so one is reach, right? You can get access to a company that is in any corner of the country. You might be sitting in Bangalore, but you can invest in a sector, a company that you like in the Northeast, in Assam, right? The second is that you get transparency to what's happening in that company, right? Through their audited financial results, through ratios like PE ratios, etc. And then thirdly, you get liquidity. So when you want to buy or sell, there is a place which is called the stock exchange where you can go and buy and sell your shares, right? So the idea is that can we replicate that for the social development sector, right? So that's broadly what this slide says, that you can now as an investor or as a fundraiser access pools of capital or access NGOs or for-profit enterprise, social enterprises in any part of the country. You can get transparency into what's happening with your money that you've given. You can demonstrate as a person who's raising funds the good work that is being done by you and attract people to put in money. And liquidity we'll talk about a little more, because liquidity, strictly speaking, is not there. I'll talk about the liquidity part a little later. Okay, so that's broadly what this slide says. I feel actually from a fundraising perspective, the true story, the true power of the social stock exchange does not lie in the zero coupon, zero principle. Zero coupon, zero principle is just a bridge, right? And you talked about hybrid, right? Mixing financial returns and social returns. But I actually think what Dr. Balu said was even more powerful, which is collaboration, right? The social venture fund, social development bonds. If you can break down those barriers that exist and come together and work, there's a lot more impact. 1 + 1 is 11, 2 + 2 is 22, right? Can be created by coming together, especially to my mind, a not-for-profit and a for-profit coming together and amplifying the impact, right? And the power of the stock exchange actually lies in being able to leverage these collaborative instruments, these hybrid instruments, and that is what I hope we will go to eventually. One other thing actually, this, and again, both the speakers before me talked about this. This is 1.0, SSE 1.0, right? And we need inputs from all of you, constructive and destructive inputs from all of you to make it 2.0, 3.0, right? Okay, so now let's talk about the fun stuff, which is how do you get onto the social stock exchange? Right, so we spoke about the fact that, and there are some people in this room who have already undergone this journey, Mr. Chaturvedi here being an example. He was the first NGO that got registered on BSE Social Stock Exchange. First you establish that you're a social enterprise, And I'll talk a little more in detail about how do you do that. Second, if you, depending on whether you're not-for-profit or for-profit, your paths kind of diverge. For a for-profit enterprise, you follow the normal stock exchange procedures, right? So there are 3 segments on the stock exchange. The main board, which is what we are familiar with, which is where the Sensex and the Nifty get their data from. There is also SME segment, which is for small and medium enterprises. And then there is a startup segment. So depending on your net worth and your liquidity requirements, you will either go to the main board or the SME segment or the startup segment. If you're a not-for-profit, there was nothing that there was no provision for a not-for-profit to be on a stock exchange. So we created a process. Okay, the process was created on the assumption that a typical NGO, 95% of not-for-profit organizations raise money at a program or a project level, and therefore will need to come to the stock exchange multiple times to raise funds, unlike a company that usually does an IPO once in their life. So therefore, rather than making the not-for-profit organization do multiple documentation, if you can rationalize the documentation, let's register you first, and then you can raise money as many times as you want. So therefore, there's a separate registration and there's a separate listing step, which doesn't exist on the for-profit side. Right? And how can you raise funds? You can raise funds, of course, through a zero coupon, zero principal, or you can raise funds through a social venture or social impact fund. Okay. So we quickly go over how do you prove that you're a social enterprise. 3 filters. First is you have to be working in one of 15 sectors. It's a list that was put out. It's a combination of, this is the list. There's a 16th, which says anything, this list is subject to modification. But essentially, this combines your Schedule 7 from Section 135. It combines the SDG. Niti Aayog priority areas, and we've added a few things which we felt were very relevant to today's days, like for example number 14, digital divide. So the first is you have to be working in one or more of these areas. The second is that 2/3 of your work has to be in one or more of those areas. So it can't be that you're doing one odd project in health and you're a social enterprise. On a consistent basis, 2/3 of your work has to be in one or more of these areas. And again, recognizing the fact that the impact that a not-for-profit creates may not always be reflecting in the top line or the revenue. It could be either in terms of revenue or expense or beneficiary that you're impacting. The third is, for at least initially, we have left out some organizations. Some organizations are barred. Those with political, religious affiliations, corporate foundations, professional trade bodies, and infrastructure and housing companies, except those that work in the affordable housing segment. Right? And there's a preference given to enterprises that target underserved or less privileged sections. So, through this, you cross the first step, which is the primacy of social intent. Now, what we'll do is we'll go down the NGO path. In what is registration, what is ZCZP. So, to be, again, we did not recreate a lot of this stuff. We picked it up from what was working already. So first is you have to be a society trust or a Section 8 company. You have to have a track record of 3 years, must have a valid 12A, 12A, etc. We've added one more to that, 1046. And we've registered NSDC, which has 1046. On BSc, must have a valid ATG registration, but I think this one is going away. So the ATG piece will go away. From a size perspective, the group felt that, so again, drawing parallel from the corporate world, you have more than 7 lakh companies, right? But only 7,000 listed on the stock exchange. Because being on a stock exchange does require additional disclosures, additional compliances. So therefore, for us at least, it was important that we onboard NGOs that are a certain size and have the resources to comply. And therefore, we set a limit of 50 lakhs. That doesn't mean that grassroots NGOs are left out, because remember, in my eyes, the future is not the ZCZP. The future is social venture funds and social impact funds, which are collaborative in nature, so even smaller organizations can come together. And also must have raised a minimum of 10 lakhs, which is meant to demonstrate that you can do fundraising. Because, and this is a question I am asked in all the seminars I do, a stock exchange does not raise funds. Right? So it is, when a company does an IPO, the stock exchange, BSE, will not raise funds for that company. BSE acts as the platform on which the funds get raised. The process for registration is reasonably straightforward. We have a portal, www.bsesocialstockexchange.com. NSE has a similar portal where you register your interest. We will send you a checklist of documentation that is required for registration. And basically, it's again very similar to what you would normally give to a CSR donor or any other donor. And you submit the documentation, and upon successful completion, you're registered. We have now 12 NGOs that have been registered on BSC. And it's taken anything from 4 days to 3 weeks to get that registration. And I'll tell you why that disparity, that 4 days versus. So you can, you guys will know is reasonably straightforward, right? All of you as NGOs would have done this. But what you would not have done is point number 2. 2/3 of your revenue, expenses, or beneficiary should be in one or more of the areas. And this has to be certified by a CA. So it has taken organizations time, because typically a CA will not go down to the project level and derive this kind of information. So it's taken organizations time to work with SCAs and get that certificate. So now you're registered, right? You've crossed the dotted line. So now you can start raising funds. So how do you raise funds? You raise funds. Again, I've addressed the zero coupon, zero principal instrument here. You send us an email on this email address, ssc@bscindia.com, and we'll come back to you with the stock exchange version of a proposal document. So if a company wants to raise funds on the stock exchange, they typically file what is called a DRHP, Draft Red Herring Prospectus, which sounds scary, but it's not. It basically lists what are the objectives, timelines, budget, risk factors, etc. What you would typically put in a proposal document to any donor. Right? And then you furnish the required documentation. We, by law, have to keep your prospectus on our website for 21 days for people to comment on. And after 21 days, you can start raising funds. One of the more interesting discussions that we've been having in the advisory committee has been, how long should we keep that funding period open? Right. So if you look at an IPO scenario, it's 3 days, 5 days, right? Typically that's the duration. But the feedback we are getting has been that 3 days to 5 days is very small, a very short period of time for the fundraising to happen. But remember one thing, the company also doesn't raise funds in the 3 to 5 days. It is the application process which is 3 to 5 days. The fundraising actually happens, you'll start seeing TV ads like 2 months before the IPO is supposed to happen. The fundraising journey actually starts much before. So we will not end up with 3 to 5 days, but I don't think it'll be 3 to 5 months either. We'll probably end up somewhere in the middle. Okay, and there are a variety of reasons for that. One of them being that under the stock exchange, there's something called ASBA, which means that when you apply to an IPO, your funds get locked in your account, but they don't move out of your account until the allotment happens of your shares, right? The reason why that happens is that you don't lose out on interest in your savings account. Now imagine if we were to keep an issue like this open for 3 to 5 months, the people who invest early will lose out because their money gets locked, right? They can't use it. So we have to strike a balance between what the investor would be comfortable with and what the issuer will be comfortable with, and that's the discussion we're having right now. at the stock exchange level as well as at the SEBI level. Some more details on the zero coupon zero principle. Minimum issue size 1 crore. So you can raise a minimum of 1 crore. Minimum subscription amount, which means the donor or an investor can put in a minimum of 2 lakhs. This limit is being kept a little high in the initial phases so that there are no unpleasant surprises. This is the definition of what is called a sophisticated investor in the SEBI stock exchange parlance. It means the person who knows what is happening with their money. It can be in the demat form only, which means that the NGO or the NPO also has to have a demat account, and minimum issue subscription required is 75%. Okay. And zero coupon zero principle will terminate. Since there's no financial transaction here, there's no interest being paid or principal being returned, will terminate once the objectives have been achieved. I will not go in detail on these, but essentially what this chart, and Savita, we can share this presentation with the people who have attended. The idea is that there are disclosures that are based on when and based on the nature of your engagement. So if you're only registered, there's a set of disclosures you have to make. If you're listed, which means you raised funds, there's a set of disclosures, and for-profit enterprises have their own. And then based on whether you're only at registration on an annual basis, on a quarterly basis, the important thing here is the difference is there's an event-based disclosure, which is relevant for everybody, which essentially means that if there is an event in your organization or your project that has a material impact on you as the organization or the project for which you've raised funds, you have to within 7 days come to the stock exchange and share it so that all investors know something like this has happened. Okay, just a brief on social assessors or social auditors. The idea here is these are not financial auditors, these are social auditors, and therefore they don't have to be CAs. They can be other qualified, experienced people. Like Dr. Balu said, there's a course, 11 module course that has been launched by NISM to qualify you, and there's a certification exam at the end that certifies you as a social auditor. There's also a self-regulatory organization, point number 4, SRO, which means that there is a company, a Section 8 company, which has been formed as an example by the Chartered Accountant Institute called ISAI, that is responsible for the code of conduct, disciplinary action, etc. for social auditors, just making sure that they are doing their job properly. And last but not the least, there are standards that have been defined, now actually not just by ICAI, but by the Company Secretary Institute, by the Certified Management Institute also, which again, this is a personal opinion, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a standard, right, if you have 3 standards. So I'm hoping that eventually they will all come together and there will be only one standard that social assessors will have to comply with. Okay, so that's briefly what I had on the social stock exchange, on NGO registration, and on zero coupon, zero principal instruments. I'm, as a part of the panel, happy to take any questions that you might have. Right? Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
I invite the panelist, Dr. R. Balasubramaniam sir, Shri G. Srinivasan, Dr. Basavaraj R. Shrestha onto the stage. The panel discussion will be moderated by Ramesh Venkatraman, Director, Vivekananda Institute of Leadership Development.
The questions would also show up on the screen for people to. Yeah. Quickly, what we did is that we circulated a form which included a registration as well as the option for people to include their questions for this panel discussion. And I must say that we received upwards of about 45 questions. What we have for this session is a curated list of 12 questions that we thought would be crucial, that needed to be answered. But we have also, but what we are also saying is that we will try to answer all of those questions that would remain, and those that we might not be able to cover during the course of this 60 odd minutes of discussion that we'll have. What we are also doing is that I will be directing some of the questions to panelists I think should be answering this question, but the panelists can obviously step in and so before we actually at the end of this session, for about 15 minutes we'll throw it open to the audience, and they can ask their questions if they have any. And so we will start. Before we actually go to the panelists with the questions, I would like to go around the panel, say for about 2 minutes each. If each of, I know Mr. Hemant has already shared his thoughts, Dr. Balu has also shared his thoughts, but if they could take 2 minutes, to share their thoughts based on their context. For example, Dr. Balu straddles multiple stools. I mean, he's been, in the social sector. So if they could say what they think of this initiative and how do they think this is going. So I'll start with Dr. Basuraj.
Firstly, thanks to the organizer. It was much required in a seminar, I would say. A right time, right moment. Thanks to Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement for organizing this and for having me as part of the panel. I think this reminds me the days of a nodal NGO project actually. So in my earlier avatar as head of projects at Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, we were actually recognized as one of the organization, a knowledge partner, to implement a nodal NGO project in Karnataka. That was by CAPAT, by Rural Development Ministry. And the objective was to kind of develop a database of all the active and actual NGOs working on the field, and then capacitate them, build their capacities to write a good proposal, to have all the compliance records in place, etc. We thought the moment we took up the project, we thought it is easy job, because we went to the Registrar of Societies office and as well as Sub-Registrar's office, got the long list. And then we were surprised, in each district there were not less than 3,000 NGOs, each district. Oh, then the manpower what we had was very less to even to talk to all the 3,000, 4,000 NGOs. Then keeping that long list, when we started going to the field, searching whether there are actually NGOs are there, finally per district on an average we were able to list some 40 NGOs, actual NGOs. Because the problem then we understood is, problem is there in the definition. How do we even define, forget defining social enterprise, even defining NGOs? Because a federation of self-help groups registered under the Societies Act is also an NGO. Education institutions registered in medical college is also an NGO. But are they doing actual what we have understood NGOs work? That's certainly not there. That's the major challenge. I thought first introducing this SSC would at least try to mitigate that a challenge and a problem what we have, even to identify an active and working NGOs with what we have understood as NGOs actually. That is one. And the DNA of NGOs in that project, what we have also found are kind of USP, I would say. They are committed to the cause rather than compliant to the clause, CLA-USE. That is the DNA of NGOs. We are mostly worried about doing right things than doing things right. So that is the major difference what I have at least understood in NGOs thing actually. As said, as it was also represented by Hemantji also, first thing I feel as a NGO fraternity, this will bring in an accreditation to all the NGOs, because if we are listed in BSc or NSC, we are kind of having that kind of accreditation. Secondly, a recognition and also reputation. More importantly, that is not there, I think mostly not recognized much, the NGO side. Some of the majorly, the recognition to the work they do, that is not normally visible. We tend to kind of, remembered or said that not all the NGOs are good, or we pass a general comment that NGOs are not doing anything. That's also there actually. So in the some of the fraternity, it will officially help us to have our report on the credible agency, on the portal of credible agency, that what this sector is contributing to the nation. That is something important. Of course, it will bring in a lot of statutory discipline to the sector. I'll stop here.
Mr. Srinivasan. And I also wanted to tell the panel that if they could take 2 minutes only, and then we have quite a long way to go. So,
hi, I feel honored to be here, mainly because I'm a product of Ramakrishna Mission, from elementary school, high school, college, everything, and to be in Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement here, it's an honor. Thank you, Savita, for inviting me, and Balu. Right. Yeah. So I'm here representing Rural Shores, which is for want of definition, I'll call it a social enterprise. No, we are 100% there. So, definitely. So we set it up 14 years back as a for-profit enterprise. So this is not an NPO or a NGO in that sense, but our objectives are social. So I'll define what it is. Basically, our idea was to set up BPOs in rural areas. When we say rural, it's not Hassan or anything, but Bagepalli, or a place called Sausar in Madhya Pradesh, Chand in Madhya Pradesh. I mean, names possibly many of us won't have heard of. Of course, here many of you are very familiar with villages, but not the general society. So we said we'll go to those places, establish BPOs, train the local boys and girls in that locality, which means 10 kilometers radius, and then we get jobs from our clients, and we get that delivered by these boys and girls. So which is why the name Rural Shores. Like onshore, offshore, we said we'll rural shore the jobs. That's why the name was given. Right. So, yeah. So that has been our this thing. And what does that do? It stops the migration from the villages to the urban areas, which is, in my view, a good thing for both. And I have seen a lot of youngsters who come from all villages staying in 4 or 5 in a room in a BTM layout, and then they run to the office and spend all, they earn a good money, but whatever they earn, they spend it on travel, food, and rent, everything. And what they are left with is hardly anything, and they are away from the family. And coming from a village to a city, they find it difficult to compete with the boys and girls here. Yeah, Christ College or St. Joseph's College or Mount Carmel girl will any day talk, and these guys won't even open the mouth. And forget girls. Girls don't even come from villages. The parents don't send them. So by providing an opportunity in the villages, the parents are so happy. We have 50% of them are girls. Because this is the only opportunity they have to work. And whatever they earn is earning for them surplus. Right? Because they don't have any expenditure. They are living in their houses. And what one would call a ruralization. Whereas everyone talks of urbanization, there has to be a balance in that also. So keep the rural practices, so the boy or the girl follow the traditions and practices of the villages. The agricultural farming practices are continued. All various practices are continued. At the same time, he is earning a good income, and the economy, if 200 boys and girls are working in a village, in and around that, there's a good amount of income coming in, which in turn generates indirect services like various other things, banking, mobiles, and any other services. And more than that, people do get a feeling of pride working in office. So these are the various social, economic, psychological impacts which we feel we are addressing. And Touchwood, yes, of course, when we started, we had a major issue. But at this time, I think I'm taking more time.
Yeah, you have crossed.
Okay, right. Okay, so I'll stop with that.
If you could quickly tell us what this SSC would mean to you as a...
Right. What I would say is, now when we started, I'll give that example. We are middle class guys, we are all employees coming from middle class families who want to put our money, hard earned money, and started this. And we have been putting money for 8 years. Right, because we never made profits for that time. Right, but how much can we, so growth was limited. And why would anyone come and put money in a company which is making losses and saying, oh, I am delivering? Now, we proved the model that boys and girls from villages can deliver. Actually, most of our centers, the delivery and quality, we are up there compared to urban, more than the urban areas. But possibly, if a social stock exchange had been there at that time, maybe where patient capital comes and people are willing to wait, they understand the thing, maybe we would have grown 5 times today and we would have reached many more. I think that is the real success of what one could achieve through social stock exchange. Yes, we are 14 years. Maybe that time no such opportunity was there, but never too late. Today we are fortunately last 3-4 years making good profit, decent profits, because I believe profits are also needed for a social enterprise, in a for-profit enterprise, to sustain and grow. Thank you.
I just want to take off from where Srinivasan said. I'm glad he's here today. I just disagree with him. I disagree that he's been having losses. I think that is exactly what we should change. He's been demonstrating enormous social profit for the last 10-11 years. Social stock exchange has given a framework to say that if your work has been 67% beyond our line that we have talked about, it is what society needs. So measuring our work, this is exactly the problem I had when ICAI decided to do this. Because if you measure it econometrically, you only look at the money. We are different. We measure it societally. And huge impact each one of us create. What Jeeva Raksha might do by investing on the future of emergency care in this country can never be understood. It will take decades to even understand it. This is all our work, and social stock exchange creates a platform for that. So to me, this is an extraordinary beginning of not an exchange. I am a strong believer, and some of you who follow my writings, I have written extensively on what is called the for-benefit economy, where society has to, there is no way, and the PM today talks of life economy, and if you deconstruct life in the real true sense and understand it from, that it's nothing but a stakeholder economy which is compassionate. We cannot, I belong to a generation and been a product of thinking where I always thought, and Hemant can still see that streak in me, that capitalism means sinners. All of these guys are ruthlessly ruining the world, and I am happily wrong. Today I believe we need to make capitalism compassionate. And we need to move towards an economy which is not shareholding anymore, which is what a traditional stock exchange might even look at, but towards stakeholding. And I believe social stock exchange creates that stakeholder thinking, stakeholder economy, and an opportunity for us to move towards living the life economy. Now, if today in this year's G20, India is going to stand up and tell the rest of the world, which is 85% of the global economy, that this is an opportunity. And we are hoping to get the social stock exchange conversation into that also, where people understand that it's a different name. It's an instrument for life economy. That's how I look at it. So we are ahead of several nations, but we'll only be ahead if we make it succeed. Thank you.
Okay, you guys have heard what I had to say, so I'll try and claw some of that time back. But basically, this is 1.0. We need you guys to participate, both by registering and listing, but also equally importantly by giving your feedback to help us evolve and be successful.
Wow. What will happen is the question is also coming up on the screen. I'm going to direct this question first to Dr. Balu and then to the former capitalist, that is Mr. Gupta. This is the commonest question that came up. The SSC will benefit only the big fish in the sector. Small and medium NGOs are going to get squeezed out of the market. That is the complaint that's come repeatedly. So I want Dr. Balu to first address it and then...
I think the details of this, Hemant, will be very good, very well placed to address it, but I'm just going the mechanics of it. I'll just tell you the conceptual framework of thinking, what we thought. Let's look at what we are not very good at. And I'm very honest, like I said, you may critique me for it. We are very poor in collaborating, and we are very short-sighted. We are a short-termism approach in being project-driven. Like some of us work in education, we say, oh, we have to be, we are very good in, like, the tribal school that SVYM runs is possibly now 88. Now it's 20, how many years? Whatever. 35 years of running. The school is running, right? And many of us do educational activities. Many of us do that. But if you were to raise fund for one school versus saying that 10 of us NGOs working in the education space, doesn't matter the size. And that is where the beauty of the social stock exchange. And that is where I think an obligation of several large NGOs sitting in this room today. Why are you here? It's a very selfish interest. Because you can work with, some of the foundation partners are here. And you will be able to enable to work and get your other people to work and catalyze them to come into a group of people who can look at an instrument or the social venture bond that he spoke about to be the binding agent. We can have an instrument which will say for education, or we can say for providing emergency care across the country. We cannot answer India's problem. We are going to be the world's largest population and 1.4 crore people, and even if we have 30 million NGOs, we can't solve it. But if we have good 100,000 NGOs saying that we will come together, if a Youth for Seva, which has got a national footprint, can get every state that they are in, can get some 10-15 NGOs come together, and they say that because they work hugely in child education and make a huge difference, but they can only reach so many thousand numbers. But if they tie up with 10 or 20 people, the small NGOs also get to benefit. They are assured of consistent support. They are assured of mentorship and programmatic monitoring, evaluation. The other problem that we NGOs have is we do good, but we don't spend time in measuring that good and telling the world what good really means. Now, I'm not saying this is a perfect instrument, and one qualification, what we have cleared is the ICAI standard, but that is not written in stone. The advisory committee is now formed a subcommittee to relook at it from a more deeper social intent, humanize it further, and make it less and less of the Savita's creed and more of, now Savita is also a social side, so I won't call you, she's a chartered accountant by training. So it's funny, SVYM CEO is compassionate capitalism, that's the storyline. And we are looking at how do we further socialize it, and I think that is where the beauty of it lies. So I don't think it's a threat to small NGOs. On the other hand, I say it's an extraordinary opportunity for partnership, for collaboration, for mentorship for larger NGOs, and hand-holding and assuring consistent support if we handle it right. I'll stop here. I think you have to explain the mechanics of what I said.
No, I think Dr. Balu's answered. I'll just add a little bit to it, which is that there is a cost to being on the stock exchange. Right? There's a cost. The registration cost is 5,000 rupees. I should have mentioned it, but that's not the cost. The cost actually is in being compliant, in doing disclosures, right? And which is why, and there's of course a cost to raising capital also, which is why, like I said in my presentation, 7 lakh companies, only 7,000 on the stock exchange. You as an organization also will need to do a cost-benefit analysis to figure out whether it's worth being on the stock exchange, right? So therefore, initially at least, we have kept the bar at 50 lakhs, which I think will include a majority of the organization, but not all. Hopefully, in time, that bar will come down as our systems stabilize, as the processes, disclosures, standards, audit standards and all stabilize and will be more inclusive. But I would like to stress on what Dr. Balu said, which is that I hope that this platform is about collaboration. It is not about individuals going to the stock exchange. It is not, sorry, I should say it's not only about individual organizations going to the stock exchange to raise funds. It should be about people coming together. And the example I sometimes use is a hospital, right? There's a pediatric unit, there's a cancer unit, there's a palliative care unit, there's an ICU, etc. The hospital works very well if all of them work together very well. Right? But if the pediatric guy decided I want to do my own thing and I don't really care what the other departments are doing, it will not work. Right? So I'm hoping that we will start setting up these hospitals rather than focusing on individual departments through the social stock exchange, and then even the smaller NGOs will be able to participate.
They need to register.
Yeah, they will need to register.
Just as follow-up, so if even the small NGOs will have to register, or would a large NGO, for example, act as a primary recipient and hand it over? Is that a possibility?
I think would be governed more by the income tax and other regulations rather than the stock exchange. So if you are the nodal, if you are the nodal NGO who's raising funds for a project where sub-granting is being done to other NGOs, the stock exchange doesn't prevent that from happening. But I think there are other laws in this land that will decide.
I'll answer it from an NGO perspective. Let's say Gram raises the name of education, but in the original prospectus disclosure itself, it says it's going to work across Karnataka, and one mode of implementation is going to be the set of 20 organizations which it will mentor, monitor, support. It's full disclosure. What the donor should know is what he's putting his money into. But remember, the law will hold Gram accountable. Somebody screws up, you are held accountable. Now, FCRA law does not permit check and transfer, but income tax laws all permit, but it will be your expenditure, you're accountable if your trust deed allows you to give and partner. But finally, the exchange will hold that single entity which has registered and raised funds accountable to the investor, because you're committing to the investor. So you are responsible for social measurements. So that's a model. The current Indian laws don't have anything against if it's Indian money, but you have to be accountable for the exchange. My way of looking at it is push small NGOs to register, because it will increase their organizational capacities, their structures, their accountability frameworks. And our sector needs to tell the world that we are also clean. It's not that we are not clean. We have to tell the world in a way they understand that we are good.
This question is, I think, for the NGO representatives and the SE. One of the things is the fundamental premise of the SSC is the need for NPOs, FPs to demonstrate social impact. Now we all know in the sector that SEs are in a state of infancy, and NPOs are like Basaraju mentioned right at the beginning, are driven by the need to do good and not necessarily see the rationale of social impact. So, given what is required, what do you think are one or three steps that you think you should be taking, and what you think the sector should be taking going forward in terms of changing this outlook? And
firstly, I would say the very fundamental approach to do good is be rational what you are doing. Like in Upanishad also, I guess there is a saying, apatra rige dhana madbeda anta. When you want to really don't want to help to the undeserving, you need to put that perspective in thinking like whether I'm doing right. And second thing is, as Hemant ji also said, 95% of the NGOs raise funding for their projects. So specific, what is project specific? That means we plan, we understand the need, we do our homework, whether this project is going to rationally answer. So I feel it's there in the kind of DNA also to apply these things and think whether this is rational in investing this fund. And I also remember, like it's in 90s. No, impact is not a new word to the sector. When DFID started advocating the lock frame approach, so many organizations are also now understanding, and after, especially thanks to the CSR, if not anything, we are increasingly using the term called impact. However, loosely we have understood it and defined it. We are using the impact terminology repeatedly. I would also subscribe to the being a management student. So what is said, Peter Drucker said, what is not managed, it's not measured. What is not measured is not managed, actually. But also, being a development person, I would also not subscribe to the linear thinking model of measuring impact, actually. So that is something we need to first come out with a metrics for impact assessment of social projects under SSE. It is not the same old impact assessment, very linear approach. How you take a non-linear approach, considering ethos of NGOs. That's something I would say fundamentally we should. That's the first and foremost thing. I would say for that it is something like it's a program impact encompassing the principles of NGOs or ethos of NGOs intact. That should not be disturbed at the initial level. Second, an important thing is we need to invest more on macro understanding, getting the small organization macro understanding of what do you mean by SDGs, what do you mean by national goals, how you need to, you may be working at the very block specific area, but how you can still connect your program to achieve or in cohesion with the national goals. And lastly, theory of change is not only for the researchers and evaluators actually. The planners need to first understand the theory of change. We need to think, actually educate more, build capacities of organizations in understanding theory of change, how they will bring short-term changes, intermediary changes, and the long-term changes. If these, we need to invest more on this intellectual capacity building, I would say.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. I understand that in terms of size, yours is quite a large in terms of sheer number of people who work in that. So have you been thinking on these lines, or do you think you should be starting to think on these lines? What is there a plan that you want to look at in terms of how you want to take this forward?
When you say think on these lines in terms of rational, yeah. No, first to me, before I get into my thing, I mean, when you said need to do good, I believe is something, I should admit here, I'm a capitalist in the head and a socialist at the heart. Right? So, I do believe many corporations, business enterprises are equally started with the intent to do good. Shining example is Tata's. My friend Sridhar is not here, from Titan. Tata's are setting up businesses which are basic requirements for the common man in remote villages, Mithapur and Jamshedpur and you name Babrala, and setting up this thing, giving employment there, and also Tata Institute contribution. You can name anything. They are one example. So they are, in my view, much more in the social sector than many of the NGOs. And many NGOs are not actually in the social sector because the social intent is lacking. So the need to do good, I would say I'll ignore that part. Everyone is in that, but the main thing is this measurement. Now, when in rural shows, when we do, obviously we are always at the board level very, very conscious that we do that. Like, I'll give an example. Suppose we have got 200 people working in a center, in a rural center. And for some reason the client has promised and around 50-60 people are not employed at all. Right. And we know that to get a new business, the cycle time is high. So what do I do with these 40-50 people? So do I ask them to go, which is what generally a business enterprise is expected to do, or not? We are very clear saying we will not ask them to go. Let them be there and we'll find jobs even if it takes 6 months, 1 year. We take on that liability. Now at the cost of a profit. Now that is where the social profit comes ahead of the business profit. But in the process, I believe when we do that, actually we start making more profits. This, that's something, it looks very, this thing, because this is what one Swamiji told me when I was saying, I gave him a donation which was beyond my capacity. He said, can you afford it? I said, sir, I somehow thought I should give you. I won't name the, he said, more you give, more you will get. And I can assure you in the 40 years, 45 years I've been working, whenever I give, I get more. Because I have to give more. That I think is what our this thing is. So I think, but the main thing is, when we do that, the social intent has to come out. The measures have to bring out the social intent. Otherwise, for a for-profit enterprise, a lot of profit measures are there. But things like how much we spend on the social impact part, there are so many measures. I don't want to get into the measures. But unless we measure and bring out the social intent, I feel we should not be even in the business. We should be in business only if we can bring social intent, even in a business enterprise, but I would not talk of that. But if I call myself I'm in the social sector, I better do that. And NGO, right? Because I also I'm a secretary of an NGO called Impact, where 45,000 girl children are being educated in north of Vindhyas, not in the south. Where again, we are very, very strict amongst ourselves as to how do we spend the money, how do we show the social intent. And donors give money to us only because of the social intent, not even. And of course, number two, measurement in terms of outcomes. So I think what we have to focus is on the outcome rather than input-output analysis. Many people get into this, how much of input has gone, how many expenditure. So this one also, I would say when you say revenue, 67% of revenue, 67% of expenditure. Sometimes the 67% of expenditure, yeah, it does qualify, but may not really bring the social intent. I'm a little not comfortable with the 67% beneficiaries, because there could be people who are not in so-called social sector, but you can create 67,000 beneficiaries by doing small amounts, right, which is 1% of the revenue. So maybe that's a criteria I would like to revisit. But I'm saying here, so we need to build this capability, if NGOs don't have, NPOs don't have, of measuring what I would call SMART. Set objectives, measure, analyze, then report, test, do the cycle again. We have to keep doing that and keep reporting, keep telling. Unless you do that, there is no rationale for the company or the NGO to exist.
This question is for Mr. Gupta. I think it's to do with the zero coupon bonds. I think it's come from the corporate sector. It says zero coupon bonds have an assured return after lock-in period. But the ZC, ZP do not guarantee this, in addition to not providing the ATG rebate. I think the question that they're asking is, why would corporates be enthused to park money in these instruments?
So this is a donation. I think it's more of a interpretation question. Zero coupon, zero principle is a donation. It is not a investment. So I don't expect corporates to park money in zero coupon, zero principle.
This answers the corporate. Actually, this question did come from a corporate entity. So, in that sense.
Yeah. So a zero coupon, zero principle is not a bond, right? I think it's important. It's an instrument, right? B, it is a donation. To put it very, very simply, it is a donation, and has to be treated like a donation.
I think the additional point that is being made is, if it's to be seen as a donation, why would you not offer it the ATG? Because I think the understanding seems to be that it doesn't lend itself to the IT rebate that a normal donation would.
This goes back to what Balu was saying. There are three things that I think we should qualify here. One is CSR is not currently allowed on the social stock exchange. Second is ATG rebate is not available on the social stock exchange. And the third is FCRA funds are not currently allowed on the social stock exchange. These things will of course change in the future. But I think the ATG is a much larger question, because the ATG itself seems to be going away. So I don't know what I'm hearing. You want to add?
Quickly validating what Hemant said is, when these discussions were on, the choice was, we wait for government to make these changes in the Act, which is a long drawn process. Any amendment to an Act comes easy. FCRA is not going to happen, so let's keep it out of the picture. So we are okay with that. But if you want an amendment to the IT Act for exemptions, if you want an amendment to the Companies Act for CSR, it's a process. Now, any amendment is a constant pressure that the government is put under by the stakeholders. Now, you can always, it's a chicken and egg story. Now, if you don't give ATG, why should somebody come here? That is why I said our NGO should, there are a lot of people, and how much does ATG give? And we forget all these things when you go by numbers. It's only 10% of your total whatever salaried income, and most people, I think the research done by Chandra Foundation and others shows that most people give much more than that, and many of them don't give for ATG purpose, unlike what we all traditionally think. Even we thought that way. So if there are people already ready, why don't we just ask them to give it through this to at least mature the ecosystem? And if the whole country is moving towards an exemption-free regime, maybe what's the point in the initial phase to even get that? If it is really worthy of putting so much of investment on the system to get a change when there are no people in the system. So if we get mature players right now, if we can get some NGOs to register, it looks very funny, it's a chicken and egg. I'm asking you to be the chicken and the egg. And if we can get a few donors who say, I'll give it to this route, we can show some success to go back and negotiate with the state. I would put it that way.
I think this question has been answered in several ways over the course of the last 3 questions. I mean, it's again going to the heart of the, the question of why should, we are doing it for our, for greater good. Why should we look at measures? So I'm going to skip it for now, given that we are running out of time. So I'll go to the audience in about a couple of minutes from now. So if the Here, if we could have 2 mics around so that will help and we could pass it around. I'll take one more question and then go to the audience. And when you ask your questions, please state your name and the organization you represent and then the question. And may I also request that you keep it to a question and not to an opinion right now. So we will be collecting opinions at the end of the program. Yeah. I think this question is about, given the diverse nature of the sector, what should we do to ensure standardization of measurement tools and assessment of impact? No NGO is the same. There are so many different NGOs. And how do we even look at standardizing measurement? Is it even possible? Or should we look at narrow specialization within these standards that we are trying to build?
I'm glad this question was asked. This is not it's an easy question, not so easy question. Why are we imagining that the measurement will be for sectors? It's for the impact. Let's not forget the intent. It's the impact. You may produce a health impact which is also societal. You may produce educational impact. And this measurement dialogue has been going on for quite some time. We have to begin somewhere, and there's some very good work done, put together by very serious people in the ICAI. It's a one level of operation. So now last committee meeting, we had a Social Auditors Network of India who's got huge experience of working only with social sector organizations. We don't have the perfect instrument, and remember, the world itself doesn't have a perfect instrument. Let's all not fool ourselves. There's so many narratives to it. So it's work in progress. We are trying to make it better and better. But one thing is very clear, it is not cast in stone. So NISM's training is a beginning. It's a very good beginning to sensitize people who want to be in this space but don't understand social sector. At the same time, just because you understand social sector doesn't mean that you understand measurement. So both are very important skill sets, go hand in hand. One cannot exclude the other. And if there are any ideas about how to measure, now we are trying out, the subcommittee is working on fashioning a tool. So my request to all of you would be this, and NGOs, I would like to make this open offer. One of the things that we are debating and talking with NISM is, can they have a 2 or 3 month internship process before certification where they can actually go work with an NGO, volunteer with them and do the social audit for them for some of their activities. The NGO also will learn and benefit. The student and the auditors also will learn and benefit, because it's a new process for us, it's a new work stream. If any of you are willing, and if we institutionalize it, maybe you all can take in those interns, get them to do a project for you, and that's not a declared thing we're going to put out on the website or something. It is more for you to learn how the process is and for them to do it. And this is something which all of us can get together. And if there are any ideas, in fact, I'm asking SVYM also to invite Sani to do a measurement of SVYM's audit, entire impact assessment. And if that will be a great, because we do our own ways of doing it, but let's do it in a standard way. So let's not get overwhelmed by this. It is much of it we'll be doing, which is putting it together, organizing it, and it is an instrument which is evolving. So it is finally the advisory committee understands all this and then recommends to SEBI, who in turn will look at it, and if they think it makes sense, and I have no reason to believe that till date they don't stand on ego and say we said this earlier and all that. They go by what is necessary for the ecosystem and then recommend to the exchanges to make that the standard. So that's how it operates.
I think we'll go to the audience if there are...
Thank you so much for all the panelists and organizing the SVYM. This definitely is very useful. I have just started with a small confusion. I think pre-read what you have shared in the mail. It clearly says the ATG exemption is provided to the investors. But now I think I can see here, I think if you see the eligibility criteria page, it is clearly, I don't know, is that just confusing that?
Yeah, I'll answer that. It probably is a little confusing. Which is why that ATG requirement is going to be taken away. But the registration requirement requires you to have an ATG, but there is no ATG benefit as of now available.
Okay,
what will happen shortly is that ATG requirement will also be taken away to clear this confusion.
Fine, thank you. I think that...
the registration we needed some yardstick, otherwise we'll have to define our own yardstick. Income tax does its job, so if they are given you ATG, they have done their due diligence, therefore we qualify you.
No, maybe I'm reading, I think
the pre-read is very clear, it's for the registration process.
Yeah, that's true, that investors can get can provide a benefit of ATG. I don't know, maybe just...
No, it's not there.
No, it's the qualification criteria section where we actually...
It's not for the investors.
Fine. I have one question to Bala sir. I mean, there is a big trust issue in the general public. You know, we believe ourselves, you know, we're doing a great job and all. Then if you go outside the NGO, and then there is a big trust issue, what we are doing. You know, and then they have a still in the if you general public, if you see that there's a NGOs what we are doing at donations and all, there is a general opinions that, you know, especially the big trust issue. But when you're looking at the reading the or maybe evaluating the other the social stock exchange across the world, and then you're talking the big numbers like a 1 trillion. There is a gap in the current government support and the NGOs, whatever the other investments we are doing, and there is a huge gap. That's the reason we are looking at the private funding. This SSC kind of instrument or the mechanisms will help to bring that gap. I mean, so do you see that the trust issue? How do we resolve the trust issue in general? That will help to bring the more, you know, participation in the SSC by the general public.
I think let's be open about it. It's not, trust issue is not for one sector or for one SSC. I think we Indians have inherited the problem the way the last 200 years has been. So let's not run away from the colonial way we have all grown up in this country, where we think you're always bad, I am better. I've also been a product of the same system, and I concede that. How many of us actually believe government is doing a good job? I have written articles against it, saying that they have no measurements of performance. Right? I have myself written it. But now I can tell you the intent of the state to become better is as evident to me as my intent to keep my NGO the best. So somewhere I feel it's a cultural DNA that we have inherited. It's a collective responsibility of Indian society to say we are moving away. But that being said, if you look at the real traditional India, we run on trust.
No doubt.
Right? That's why we are not as as society as litigant as other countries. So that is there in us. It is just that the structural manifestation of it has been subdued by various clouding that we have had. Now we can shake it off and get up and say that it is. So it's not just social stock exchange. All our rules were designed like that. But today it's not. We are now designing things where we think you can certify your own. Why do you think you need a gazette officer to sign your SLC marks card? Because we think you're not honest, you will forge it, and therefore I have to certify. Today it's not there. You can self-certify. We are moving a lot towards trusting each other. I would be positive. Look at the silver lining, not the dark cloud. The silver lining is we as a nation are moving towards trusting each other. So let's begin with that. That is the reality. And we have to keep expanding the silver lining till the dark cloud disappears. That's all I will say.
My name is Vijay Paul. I'm from Prakalpa Saujanya Foundation. My question is to Mr. Hemant. Basically, definition of a project. And that's where probably we need to really look at. See, projects could be different nature. There are projects which are built, which are operate, which are build, operate, which will be build, operate, transfer. There are various methods in terms of how to look at the project. And there are a lot of programs in NGO sector which basically have to wait for some time to get the impacts out realized. So therefore, how do you look at that? That means if somebody is doing a build project, then you have to go for if you have to operate it, will you have to go for one more funding round? Or is it that, no, because are we going back to the same square zero? Because the donor is also giving for 1 year. I'm getting a project which is for build, and then for operator, I have to still go for another set of donation. So are we looking at that challenge in the whole framework here? Thank you very much.
See, structurally, you can actually raise a zero coupon, zero principal instrument with a validity of 10 years, okay, or 20 years, or 99 years. Right? There is nothing restricting you from raising it for 1 year only. And therefore you could, I mean, like for example, in January I was in Jaipur and I met this NGO which makes the Jaipur foot, right? If you think about them, they don't have a program or a project, right? They have people who come, who are disabled, they fit the foot and they go, right? Train them, etc. Not that simple, but yeah. So therefore, for them, they will actually not be raising a zero coupon, zero principal instrument for a program or a project. They'll actually be raising funds for operating expenses. And therefore, they can say for the next 5 years, my operating expenses are 100 crores or whatever it is, right? And I want to have a zero coupon, zero principal, which But what is important is that they will still have to define the outcome that will get achieved with that 100 crores. Right? They will have to say that every year I will 10,000 feet will get whatever, right? They will still have to define what is the social return the investor will get in exchange. But otherwise, structurally, there is nothing stopping.
My name is Shiv Shankar. I am SVYM co-partner, chartered accountant from profession. So my question is basically on impact. See, I have assured, assuming 10th class students, I will get average of 70 marks from 100 students. That is what I have projected and I raised the funds. Assuming I have not achieved. Okay. So what will happen? Because money is spent. So I got 69 or 65 or I have not achieved, I have achieved only 50%. So what will happen? So ultimately, so what we are, because this is something, so the benefit is something I can do budgeting for financials. I can't do exactly budgeting and achieving the same thing for results. So how do we reconcile or what will happen? So that is the basic question I feel.
So there is no...
Yes, because we discussed similar things in the
correct. So one is that it's a great question. There is no one answer to this question, which is why we discuss, to Dr. Balu's point. And if you take a parallel, so you should look at it from two lenses. One is look at it from what you do today. Right? So today you raise funds from your donors, right? And let's say you're not able to achieve the outcome that you had promised. There will be a reluctance on the part of the donor to give you money next time, because you told him you will have 100 kids with an average of 70. Right? You had 100 kids with an average of 50. So the same thing will happen. The same thing happens on the corporate side. If my financial results, if I had said I will grow at 14% and I grew at 12%, right? The investors next time will question, because the price bakes in a certain rate of growth, investors will be reticent to buy my shares the next time. But the reason why, so that's the straightforward answer to your question, that if you don't achieve your outcomes, you will not get money the next time. Okay? Or people will be reluctant to fund the next zero coupon, zero principal or social impact fund that you manage. However, it is not a straight black and white analogy, because if today you had a genuine reason for which you were not able to achieve the result, then there is a chance to that community thing that she was talking about. There is a chance for a dialogue, right? You can sit in front of the donor across the table and say, listen, there was a pandemic or there was a whatever, right? And I could not achieve the result. And therefore the failure is not with me, the failure is with an external factor. And therefore, I really like the point she made, which is that the social stock exchange should not just be a commercial stock exchange. It also needs to be a community. Right? There has to be a dialogue which takes place in addition to the transactions that take place. Which is why Dr. Balu has been very insistent on not calling the social auditor a social auditor. He wants to call it a social assessor. Because it is not as simple as auditing a balance sheet or a profit and loss statement, right? There are no black and white, there are shades of grey. And this, to my mind, is also going to be a part of the evolution of the social stock exchange as to how these dialogues happen, how these standards get set.
Can you quickly add something? So this, it's a great question, again from the perspective of how does society penalize companies, poorly performing companies, right? At the same time, if I were to abuse the obligation that I have given to SEBI, etc., you can it's a criminalization process. You can prosecute me. So what we have thought of at this point of time is, if there are legitimate reasons for underperformance, which is understandable, markets will punish you. Like next time, they will not fund you. But if you are corrupt and you make money, and there are statutory mechanisms in the system, income tax can go after you, ED can go after you. There are legitimate reasons. Courts can convict you. Just because the case is filed, we are not saying. We are only saying, remember, the exchange is about forcing disclosures, telling the world what you are doing. If you are arrested, you will say. If you're convicted, you will say, and you will publicly put it out. If still people want to put money onto you, they're idiots. Right? But we are only saying it will have to be told. But if it's an offense which breaks any law of the land, the social stock exchange will deregister. There's a process. That they will not allow you to also say, because we are hoping that you will get credibility by coming onto the social stock exchange. The exchange cannot lose its credibility by getting non-credible organizations. So they will definitively see that if any law of the land is being transgressed, they will ask you, there's a process. They'll have to think through the process and have you out of it. So we are very conscious that legitimate underperformance is different from fraudulent or malified intent fundraising. There will be such players, we don't know. And that's another reason some of you might have asked this question, why 50 lakhs? Because we are not saying only large organizations should come in. We don't want it to fail. Right? The first initial years, you have some gatekeeping where some credible organization with structural systems, even a large organization like SVYM needs a full-time person to only think and worry about making sure this works. Small organizations can't afford that kind of bandwidth, but we want it to succeed first. And then slowly, like Hemant mentioned earlier, to relook at what is the threshold point to which we can lower. Right now, we have also no idea what the threshold point is. Is it 5 lakhs? Is it 50,000? Is it 5 crores? It has come, a lot of discussions have brought it from 2 crores to 50 lakhs now. Any lower, I think, might not be. Even the discussion whether should it be 3 years? Why can't a registered organization start tomorrow? Why aren't we questioning Government of India or any government that says you must have a 3-year balance sheet to fund? Why aren't we questioning corporates saying that if I don't know how good you are, I won't fund you, so give me 3 years balance sheet? The same logic. So we have just copied logic that is there in the ecosystem in several places.
Yeah, very short take question. 1 or 2 questions. It will not take a long time. My name is Viewpoints from IDF. How the supply side has been on the social stock exchange been sensitized? If efforts are already made, what has been their response?
So we actually have just started making those efforts. I personally have done about 20, this is the 26th seminar I'm doing in the last 6 months. I would have done 2, I think, focusing on the supply side. And we are very, very conscious of the fact it's only 2 out of 26. And therefore, there is an increased focus on addressing the supply side also.
So I just actually had a question, more of clarity. So when Ms. Ananya spoke, she mentioned that a lot of SSCs allowed secondary trading and some didn't allow secondary trading. So is there any clarity about the Indian SSC having secondary trading?
Sure. So on the for-profit side, I think it's clear, right? You're a part of the, right? So I'm assuming the question is on the not-for-profit side. And I'll give you a philosophical answer rather than okay, why, what trades? The shares don't trade, value trades, right? Because you associate a value with a share, which is the market price, that is what trades, right? A zero coupon, zero principal instrument, as of now, does not have a value, right? Where I give the money, it's like fill it, shut it, forget it type, right? There is no value associated. Can we create a value? Which is why I'm saying it's a philosophical answer. I think we can. So as an example, just like carbon credits, can we create a social credit system, right? Where people can buy and sell social impact. It's a reasonably far-fetched thought, but we have to not look at trading, we have to look at value creation. Right? How will I create something of value, which then somebody will want to buy? Okay, so that's the...
Just adding to that, if there is, so just a continuation of that for some clarity. So along with the ZCZP, what is the additional investment module? Because if a zero coupon thing is a donation, what is the investment module for an NPO?
So I'm not clear on the question itself. But so zero coupon, zero principal is a donation. Yeah. There's no investment there. There is, like Dr. Balu said, there is the social impact fund, social development bonds. There are other instruments that are available. that will allow people to invest and get a combination of financial return and social return.
Venkatesh Murthy from Youth for Seva. I had a question about FCRA or foreign investment. Right now, I understand that foreign investment is not allowed. Is there any room for NRIs? Can they invest if they are US citizens? And also, second question is about multinational companies which are operating in India, like Cisco India Private Limited, Deloitte India Private Limited. Can they invest?
So the rules. I'm going to have a follow-up discussion on this afternoon on the way to the airport. But essentially, and maybe so, zero coupon, zero principle has no CSR, no ATG, no FCRA. Right? However, the other instruments that we've been talking about, like a social impact fund or a social development bond, do not have these restrictions. Correct? So therefore, in theory, the NRIs, etc., or can invest through other instruments, not through the donation route.
I'll try to keep it as short as possible. I'm Iman B from Satwa Consulting, a social impact consulting firm. And it's very interesting to hear that there's a capacity building angle that's being thought at. And there's the supply side, the demand side, as well as the intermediary. My query here is, what are some of the initial thoughts on capacity building of the supply side?
So the question is reasonably wide, right? One is that, and I'll answer it in 2 or 3 ways. One is that if there is no CSR, there's no ATG, then we have to identify the target market for which the zero coupon, zero principle instrument awareness should happen, which would typically be foundations, high net worth individuals, family offices, even people who are willing to donate more than the 10% limit, or companies that are willing to do more than the 2% CSR limit, right? Second is that, so that's kind of identifying who we should be addressing the supply side discussion. The second is that structurally, the concept of transparency or the social audit, social assessment piece is something that needs to be highlighted to these supply side guys to demonstrate the value add that is happening, right? And the third is that the network of not-for-profits across the country that they will be able to access is the third thing that I think we'll need to highlight when we talk to these supply side guys.
I'll just quickly add, and this is sort of concluding remark I would say, is that, see, this is a new game. Nobody asked you where's 100 crores coming from, right? Nobody asked us. That's a good question to begin. Where the hell is this 100 crores? Who's going to give us the 100 crores? And SEBI doesn't have 100 crores. BSE and NSE can simply say I have 100 crores. So it's been an effort to communicate, and 2 people have come together, SIDBI and NABARD, and 30 crores has been given by NABARD already, I think, as a first installment, and therefore there has to be a governance mechanism to manage that money, right? So now there's a subcommittee in the advisory group working with NABARD and SIDBI and other team players to say what will the money get spent on? What are the rules of the game? What are the capacities that each box needs? What are the supply side might need something else. Demand side will need something else. All of them will need the same thing sometimes, right? So those things are getting worked out. And once that is done, who are the capacitators? Who are the ones who can build capacity? Maybe those people's capacity has to be built. So this is, I would say, the responsibility, a collective responsibility of the exchanges, SEBI committee, our committee. We are already subcommittee working on developing the material for capacity building and saying what is it that we need, how to frame it, what are the governance structures, what are the outputs. As we mature, we'll arrive, and it's all work in progress. So any of you have any ideas? What is it that can be done? Please let us know. And that can really be a participatory process where we'll understand better, because all of us are in the field. We all have different ways. We'll aggregate it and see what is practical. Thank you.
Okay, so
thank you so much.
The best way is whoever reached out to you to come to the seminar, send it to them. They'll make sure they get sent it to me. Because if Yeah, so SVYM is taking the lead here in Karnataka, so we send it to them, they will possibly aggregate it, and whoever amongst us has to respond to that, the best person's mind will be addressed, that I can tell you. All of us may not have all the answers, but some of us who are good at it will find the answers.
Okay, just to add to that, there is a WhatsApp group, there is also the email group which you can write into. If you have further questions, we also have already told you that we will go back to the panel and answer all of the other questions that we couldn't take up today. And you can also, send your questions to the same group. Yeah, and we'll create an FAQ document and share it with all of you at the. So thank you to the panel for taking the time to answer all these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I request all the panelists to be seated on the stage. I now invite Dr. Kumar, Health Sector SVYM, to render the vote of thanks.
Thank you. So, I'm sure it was a very educative and wonderful session. And, as I was listening to Ananya in the morning as a pediatrician, there were a lot of death stories that she was sharing. I was wondering, was it an infant mortality, or, then I was thinking whether there were many stock exchanges themselves died. So kind of so maternal mortality kind of thing. So this child is being being born. So we are not just, and when Hemant ji said about there will be SSC 1.0, after that 1.0 there will be 2.0, the second child will be born. So as a development biology researcher now, not just a pediatrician, I'm very happy that this dialogue that today we have initiated is going to go forward. So for that, I would like to thank Shri Hemant ji for coming over here and sharing his all what the work that has been has gone so far, and sharing all the clarifying many of our doubts. So thank you, Hemant ji, and I request Savita to hand over a memento to Hemant ji. There's a painting done by our tribal children in our tribal school.
This is no choice, so we ask him what in chapter 4.
And I also thank Dr. Balu for initiating this thought process, very early, and we were also wondering what is that he is doing. Social. So I think, but thanks to you for clarifying a lot of doubts, and also pushing us to do this event. And I request Shri Ramakrishna Mudre sir to yes, will formally thank you. We are not giving you the book to read again. We are not giving you the book to read again. So I thank Mr. Srinivas for actually being one of the panelists and representing the social enterprise side. So I request Dr. Deepak to hand over a memento to Srinivas. Thanks to Basvaraj for agreeing to be one of the panelists and sharing his perspective on behalf of the NGO side. So I request. Yes. No, he will be happy. So I request Praveen to share the memento.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to Ananya for starting the session with wonderful overview. So I request Dr. Pushpalata to hand over the memento to Ananya.